Let me give you a more practical description of what the ANS is. So like right now you're listening to me, you're listening, to this lecture, you're trying to grok it with your, with your mind, right? And at the same time, your heart is beating, right? Your blood pressure is being regulated, your temperature is being regulated, the food that you just ate is digesting in your belly. Your hormones are being monitored and regulated for you right now, right? There's all sorts of things that are going on right now that you're not aware of, that you're not in charge of, you're not controlling in any way, right? So this is the machinery of your body. This is your automatic/autonomic nervous system, right? And literally there are hundreds and hundreds of physiological things going on that are autonomic in this way that you're not aware of. Right? So for you to be sitting in your chair doing what you're doing, your ANS is working really well. Right? If it wasn't working really well, you would be off to see a doctor. Right? So basically, heart rate, breathing, metabolism, temperature, endocrine hormone, muscle tone. But we're really going to be looking at these two sub-branches of the ANS. The first is the sympathetic nervous system. This handles your fight or flight. This handles fear. This handles aggression. This handles, anxiety. When you get butterflies in your stomach, or the hairs on your neck stand up, or you get goosebumps, right? These are all autonomic nervous system responses that are preparing you for something, right? The flip side of your sympathetic nervous system is your parasympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic is all about calming, right? So sleep is a parasympathetic response. Digestion is a parasympathetic response. Calming, attachment, any kind of soothing are parasympathetic nervous system responses. But so is in a condition of threat, in a state of threat, your parasympathetic nervous system shifts from nice, sweet, calming responses to protective responses that are very adaptive, and so you get dissociation. Which we'll define later as the release of endogenous opioids into your system. Depression is a parasympathetic nervous system response. I'm not saying entirely, right? There's different things that can obviously lead to depression. If you're eating nothing but sugar all day, in your life, you're gonna probably be depressed because you're not making neurotransmitters, right? So there's lots of things that can lead there, but what we're suggesting here is that there are stress and trauma-based depression, and that's related to your ANS. Okay? All right. So a great deal of who you are, your physical, emotional, mental health experience arises from this implicit, this seamless, invisible layer of our machinery. We really find that the ANS becomes a preferential pathway for the psychedelic to take, right? So in other words, you can have somebody come into your office, they may have spent 20 years in psychotherapy, doing talk therapy work, cognitive work. You introduce them to this nervous system pathway that we're gonna head into that territory, then bring the psychedelic on board. The psychedelic will absolutely take that processing pathway, that nervous system pathway, right? And I think one amplifies the other. There's a synergistic relationship there. What I'm speaking to here is that the autonomic nervous system, once it gets on board, really actualizes, potentiates the medicine, right? It gives it a pathway where it can really do wonderful things. Here's a key point of it, right? So threat equals activation of the ANS, right? Seems pretty basic. The greater the real or perceived threat, right? Everything is ultimately perception here. The greater the ANS response. So what that means is, if we charted on this graph, the x-axis is threat level. Anything an organism perceives as threatening can be on that x-axis. It could be being shot at in war. It could be being assaulted. It could be being in a car accident, surgeries. It could be being an infant and your needs not being met, right? So anything an organism experiences as threatening shows up here. And then, the example that I frequently use and makes sense in Colorado that, imagine driving in your car in the wintertime, it's snowing, you're on the highway, you're going, 60 miles an hour and you're listening to the radio, you're relaxed, everything's okay, right? Until you hit that patch of ice, right? And soon, we've all had this experience, right? All of a sudden we hit that patch and maybe we start drifting towards the other car or something like that. And when that happens, instantly you feel the panic and the fear, right? So basically, your threat level just went up. You're about to lose control of your car. So your autonomic nervous system kicks into gear immediately, right? You grip the steering wheel tightly. Your heart is thumping in your chest. Adrenaline just got released. Your neck muscles are tight. Your jaw is tight. Your stomach muscles are tight. And you're hyper focused on the road, right? And you did not choose any of those responses. Your body went into all of them, right? Your body, your fast brain initiated all of this. And so we get something like this, right? This state 0 is a state of no threat and no activation. And so we get this little line out there. Now, so for the purposes of this map, right? So I want you to imagine your ANS response as a marble on a track that's being acted upon by gravity. Right, so it has like a physicality to it. The marble seeks the most stable, relaxed, and efficient position possible because ANS activation is a state of tension and requires biological energy to maintain. So basically, what we're saying here is when you're amped up like that, when you're gripping the steering wheel, you're in a state of tension, right? And it's appropriate tension because, again, you're about to lose control of the car. But it's biologically expensive for organisms to be this stressed, for it to be this tight and this hyper focused and this activated, right? So once the threat is passed, the ANS marble homeostatically, there's that word again, seeks to go back to state 0. So basically what we're saying is, once the threat is over, let's say, you regain control of your car, you slow down, just a minute or so after that, your nervous system starts to calm as well, right? Because again, this is biologically expensive. So your nervous system wants to be at state 0. If it doesn't have to be activated, it does not want to be activated, right? And so the adrenaline leaves our system and your neck muscles unwind and you're like, oh, that was scary. And then you drive home more safely, right? We're all used to that. However, we find that there's more complexity to the ANS, the mammalian ANS. And this is a really good thing for us, right? What I'm about to show you is very adaptive, right? So the mammalian ANS is more complex with various what are called attractor states that are built into the system. Right? So attractor states are stable states. They can hold the marble and ANS activation for long periods of time. They are discontinuous preferred states for the ANS to pop into, meaning that if you read the manual, so we talk about sort of the ice skater, right? And the ice skater, the act of skating, there's 2 stable states. You're either up and you're skating or you're flat on the ground. Right? There's no in-between state. There's no kind of being up or something like that. You're either one or the other, right? So that's what we're saying here. There's stable states in the mammalian nervous system that are very functional and adaptive. Okay, so here's what it looks like, right? So state 1's the first state, and I'm going to switch from our car analogy to, animal, wildlife analogy, right? So let's say we're all zebras. We're all down here at state 0. We're eating grass. It's a nice sunny day on the African plains. And we're hanging out, and then there's some rustling in the tall grass nearby, right? And when you're in a state of nature, that rustling could be the wind or it could be the predator. Right? So basically, we're all geared to have this startle response, right? So there's rustling, we all look over, and it's just the wind, right? So basically, we startle a little bit, and then the nervous system says, oh, well, there's nothing here, so we just roll back down to 0. Barb, I love your pantomiming of my states. She's like, oh, Barb's the zebra back there, saying oh, yeah, there's nothing to do here. I feel affirmed up here, Barb. Thank you, like for mirroring here. It's really sweet. And then let's say, you know, an hour goes by and there's more rustling in the tall grass. And this time we look over and it's a predator and she's stalking us, right? So at that point, if you've ever seen this, like National Geographic stuff, right? Like a lion will sort of stalk a herd of zebra until she finds the perfect situation, the perfect zebra to go for. It's actually very strategic, right? So they really look for the ideal situation, right? They're looking for the sick zebra or the elderly or things like that. And so basically that line's stalking us, and so our nervous system moves into state 1 here, right? State 1 is a state of activation. It's mild stress. And here are the symptoms of state 1. Increased energy, fear, anxiety, anger, hyper-alertness. So I will want you all to get familiar with these symptoms, because when you see it in your client, it's good to know where they are on the map and what you can start predicting is going to happen next, right? So memorize these. And again, think about it this way: if you walk into a therapist or a doctor's office and you come with these set of symptoms, they're gonna be like, oh yeah, this is awful. We have to treat this, right? Let's give you some benzos or something like that. But if you think of like the conditions of threat under which these things may have been formed, they actually make sense, right? So if you're being stalked by a wild animal, you want to be hyper alert. Right? You want anxiety, you want fear, you want increased energy, you want insomnia, right? You don't want to fall asleep if you're being stalked, right? If you're in a dangerous situation. If you're, there's plenty of soldiers that are in war zones where it's quiet, but it doesn't mean they're out of danger, right? Their entire nervous system is at the very least just like habitually, chronically in this state of hypervigilance, mild stress, at best, right? If you decide to, you're walking home from work and you decide to go down a dark alleyway in a city at night, your autonomic nervous system is automatically going to move to state 1. You don't have a choice in this, right? This is, and the zebras don't have a choice in this. When they're being stalked by a lion, the alarm goes out and everybody's like, okay, we have to be awake now, right? Because guess what? Guess why? If that wasn't the case, if this nervous system trough did not exist, let's say there was some zebra, like primordial zebra, that didn't have this built into their system, and they were just hanging out here even when they were being stalked by a lion, guess who's the lion's going for? The calm zebra, right? Not the hypervigilant zebra. Right? That got weeded out from the gene pool a long time ago, right? Yeah, and so excitement can happen in state 1, right? People jump out of airplanes, right? People go to see horror movies. People ride roller coasters. So there can be a certain pleasure to the state. Irritability, annoyance, increased heart rate, breath speed. Again, insomnia, somatic tensions like tight muscles, headaches, tight jaw. I often wonder, people who have TMJ, sensations of heat, lots of contraction, muscle contraction happens here. Restlessness or feeling fidgety, like constantly buzzing. If you know clients that are constantly wiggling in their chair, constantly having to move around, they're probably at a state 1. Speedy thoughts and feeling nervous, right? So again, this is not a horrible state. Again, people choose to go here, right? So another way to think about this is, imagine state 0 as being Hawaii, right? We go there for a vacation. We go there to relax. So this is again, an attractor state, right? Somebody can land here in the state, and we can live an entire lifetime here. This is New York, right? This is Manhattan. Yeah. Oh yeah, easily, right? But think about how New York defines itself, the city that never sleeps, right? It's like the perfect definition of state 1. And if you think about it, eventually, this is not horrible, but we'll have neurosis over time. Think about Woody Allen, right? Somebody who's just constantly in a state of mild stress. Okay, then we have state 2, defined as high stress. This is a position of maximum sympathetic arousal. So this is when the lion finds her perfect zebra and takes off. And as soon as that lion takes off, all the zebras take off, because if you don't, then you die, right? So the way I think about state 2 is like, you know, a coiled spring launches, right? Tons of energy that's launching. So it's maximum activation, maximum performance. It's short in duration, right? So this is full fight or flight. That lion's going to get her prey in 30 seconds, a minute, or she's not going to get her prey, right? One way or the other, the chase is over, because this is a sprint, right? You cannot exert that much energy for that long of a period of time. This is an unstable state. That's why we're drawing it as a flat line, meaning that people do not live in state 2. Right? They can live at state 1, they can live in state 0, but you cannot live in a panic attack. Right? This is in the human context, this is the realm of panic attacks. So let's go to the symptoms of state 2, which are panic, hyperventilation, heart racing, sweating. This is not a nuanced experience. I will have clients sitting on my couch, they're processing a state 2 event, right? And they're safe right now, right? The present moment reality, they're totally safe. Event memory reality, they're going to state 2, right? So they're sitting on a couch, they're going into full-on fight or flight reactivity, hyperventilation, intense muscle contraction, shaking and trembling, lots of muscle activation. They'll have rage here, right? So in state 1, you might have anger. In state 2, it'll be full-on rage. In state 1, people might have fear. In state 2, it'll be full-on terror. Maximum performance, very fast thinking, again, does not last very long, right? And also, when I say very fast thinking, I don't mean good thinking. I'm not saying this person's wise in this moment, right? They're making very fast decisions, split moment decisions. They could be completely wrong. Questions about these first 2 states? Yeah.
How long can that last? Like,
state 2?
Yes.
So I'll put it this way. The avoidance of state 2 and what's happening there can last a very long time, can last hours, right? But actually, if people were to actually go into the panic attack and have it and be supported through it, 30 seconds, a minute, you know, yeah, very short period of time. The marble just is not sticking there.
Okay, so as you watch this video, just think about the reactions that are part of states 1 and 2. Heightened energy, anxiety, fear, aggression, fight or flight responses, and even panic. But the thing to really note here is just how essential his body is in processing this charge. Okay, so you can see that the wave is building here, right? It's sort of gathering. And this is the height of it. Lots of intensity, but his body is doing a great job at processing it. And then it's ebbing, right? Then it's over. He's on the other side of it. It shows up, the intensity's here for about 30 seconds, and then he's on the other side of it. And in this clip, we have a volunteer using cannabis psychotherapy to process a battlefield event. He happens to be a veteran, to process an event where running was essential to survival. So this is a full-on state 2 wave, and we're at the peak of it here. Right? Lots of fight or flight reaction that's playing through the body. And again, it doesn't last very long. And he's on the other side of it. Okay, things are starting to calm now. He's able to think more. And a lot of charge just moving through his system.
I was yelling at the guys to run to the hole faster. Because they are going to get shot by artillery if they didn't get in the hole.
Now, this last clip is of a student in the PSI Psychedelic training program. And like the others, she's working with cannabis here, and this is an example of what gets uncovered relatively easily when the psychedelic combines with the autonomic nervous system pathway that we've been talking about. Her system is about to process a state 2 event here, which looks big and scary, but as you'll see, it only lasts about 30 seconds or a minute. Now, there is an idea in therapy that I want to talk to you about here. It says that you should not let a client get to this level of activation because it's not therapeutically useful and it could be re-traumatizing. It's called the window of tolerance model, and it says you can only do good therapy when people are in a comfortable middle zone where they're not hyper aroused or hypo aroused. Basically, they're not too activated and not too numbed out, right? So now the problem with this theory is that trauma does not live in comfort zones, right? It lives in the extremes, and we have to be willing to go there with the client in order to process it. If it was comfortable, it wouldn't be trauma. If it was easy, a person's system would already have cleared it. It's been stuck for years like this because it is intense, and it looks like this when it shows up. And people do need support getting to the other side of it. This may be the window of tolerance may be a useful concept when people are working in ordinary states of consciousness. But if we look at what a person's body wants to accomplish while they're being supported by psychedelic medicine, it looks a lot more like this, right? So you can't do the window of tolerance when during a psychedelic state because it's way too directive, and it's moving contrary to where the client's system organically, naturally wants to go, right? So, and I'll say that if you gave me the choice of whether to have to manage and live with symptoms for years on end, including, maybe years of medication, or to go through short periods of hell like this, which are destabilizing, I will absolutely take this every time, right? That's my choice. That's the choice that the clients that choose to work in this model decide to make for themselves, which is why I say that this model, it certainly is not for every therapist. It's not for every client. But if you're the type of therapist or client that wants to sort of get at pieces that look and feel like this, that are this deeply hidden, and have this much reactivity coming out, then I think this model is appropriate. And finally, if you're interested, there is a video on psychedelicsomatic.org where this particular student is talking about her experience of this session, how she felt during and after it. So you're welcome to go take a look at that. Okay, here is the clip. What? Is that pressure still on your chest?
No.
Okay.
My jaw is cold.
Yeah. There's more in the jaw, more to go.
Oh God, no.
Sweetie, you're doing great.
I have to do more of that today.
Well, only if you want to. It's your choice. You could ignore it. You can.
What time is it?
We're doing fine on time. Yeah.
I don't want to. I'm scared of it.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Sweetie, can I just say,
Yeah.
You have been going into very scary places and coming out the other side just fine. You've been doing great.
I don't want to.
Okay, you don't have to.
Okay, I guess I can.
Okay.
Okay, I'm supposed to just focus on it, the cold in the jaw.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, focus on the cold in the jaw. Yeah, you're doing great waves.
Okay.
Yeah. See, yeah, I can see the jaw quivering. There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Ah,
We're right here.
I'm scared.
We're right here.
I'm scared.
Yeah.
I'm scared.
Yeah. We're right here. Yeah, trust the way. Trust it. Trust it. All the way through. You're almost on the other side, sweetie. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Keep letting go into it.
Okay. Okay.
Keep letting go into it. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
I feel warm.
Yeah.
I feel warm. I feel warm.
Yeah.
I hope these videos are clarifying the theory we've been talking about and giving you a sense of how the psychedelic needs the body to process through these events. You can't put what you just saw into words. It's a physical charge that has to move through a person's system, right? It's an actual physical thing that's happening there. And I hope the other thing that is becoming clear is that if you want to resolve symptoms instead of managing them, a psychedelic therapy session isn't an easy, happy journey, right? We're looking for the difficult experiences. We're looking for the bad trips because they're made up of your programming. They're made up of your history.
I'm suggesting to you that everything that we've covered so far is stress. It's not trauma. And I know that may be a little strange to say because we're talking about people having panic attacks. Most of the time when we think of panic, we think that, oh, that's traumatic, right? But hear me out here in terms of why I'm suggesting this. So we're saying that stress is the activation of the sympathetic, the fight or flight branch of the autonomic nervous system. Trauma emerges with the overwhelm of the sympathetic, overwhelm of our active defensive responses, right? When you can't punch or kick or run your way out of something, that's when trauma emerges. So basically, when the active fight-flight responses fail to resolve the threat, i.e. when active solutions fail, your system will engage passive solutions. Yeah? So this is where we see a massive parasympathetic response emerge. The body begins to shut down, dissociation happens, fragmentation happens here. So basically, what we're saying is that, let's say you're that zebra up here at state 2, and you're running for your life. You're darting, you're kicking, you're going left, you're going right, and let's say it's not working, right? So at some point, and the lion's gaining on you, right? There's this recognition that the zebra has, and not in a cognitive way, but in a more bottom-up kind of way, that it's done everything it can do, and it hits a point of overwhelm, right? Once it hits that point of overwhelm, it moves into a collapse. And then we get state 3, which we define as moderate trauma. It's a relatively stable state. Again, a person could live an entire lifetime in state 3. It attracts and holds the marble. And here are the symptoms of state 3. So again, the important piece here is this is a moderate opioid dump. Right? You all know what I'm talking about when right? Like, I'm not talking about somebody going out and taking an opioid. I'm talking about the pharmacy in our brains produces opioid-like chemicals. Lethargy happens here, sleepiness happens here, heaviness happens here. And I'm not talking about sort of normal, like you're tired from a long day and you're starting to get sleepy, right? I'm talking about your client that's upset that they're late to therapy, right? Because of the traffic it took to get to therapy. But then, you know, that you start processing the event that happened 8 months ago where 2 people died, and then all of a sudden they cannot keep their eyes open, right? They're just like yawning, and their consciousness is diffused, they're confused. Right? So basically, you're sitting in front of somebody who's being flooded with opioids at that point. The heaviness is interesting. People will feel like, oh, my arms feel heavy, my neck and head feel heavy. It feels like my legs are made of lead. They'll say things like that. Collapsed posture, right? So remember, states 1 and 2, like like tight muscle tone. State 3, you know, flaccid. Right, so lessening muscle tension, fogginess, dissociation kicks in. People's vision will start to get blurry here. Again, sensations of weight, feeling cold. That's a fairly interesting one here, right? So basically, there's changes in blood flow patterns when the system thinks that it's under imminent threat of death, right? So basically, blood is rerouted from the extremities towards the organs.
That's so that if they got cut in battle, they wouldn't die.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to bleed out. You're less likely to bleed out. So your body's really shifting that. And of course, what that means is that your hands feel cold, your toes, your feet feel cold. And one of the interventions for that is we'll have people track the cold, right? Just like, oh, really? Watch the cold keep moving up, right? And then it just gets closer and closer. Nausea, very common symptom of state 3. We don't see that anyplace else on this map, right? Confusion. Slowed thinking. Remember, states 1 and 2 have fast thinking. It's sharp thinking. This, because of the opioid flood, people are confused and slowed down. Right? Again, just keep imagining if somebody sat down in front of you and just took an opioid, what would they be like? Right? Suicidality and hopelessness. Let me address hopelessness first. So, every single client I've ever worked with that's processing a state 3 event experiences hopelessness with it, right? Because again, if it wasn't hopeless, they wouldn't have ended up in state 3. They wouldn't have hit that point of overwhelm, right? They would have been in states 1 and 2, right? But state 3, they absolutely go to hopelessness, and it'll be like, you know, especially if it's state 3 that got formed from childhood. If somebody lived an entire childhood in state 3, they'll say things like, oh, this is never going to change. I can't stand being with this. It's always been here. It's always going to be here. And of course, you know, we haven't talked about the interventions yet, but ultimately we're trying to have people reassociate to everything about themselves. Reassociate to what it means to be you. And right now, what it means to be you is hopeless. Right? So people will describe hopelessness, and I'm like, yeah, this is totally hopeless. Like, keep giving it to me, right? Keep laying it out here. Suicidality, that's the other interesting one that shows up. This is the first and last place suicidality shows up on this nervous system map. I'm not saying, you know, people can be suicidal for various reasons, obviously, but I'm saying suicidality related to threat shows up here. All right, so here's what I mean. If we go back one, right? So state 0, there's no threat. You're not looking for any solutions. You're not looking for a way out. State 1 and state 2, they're threats, but they're threats that your body was capable of handling. They're threats that were within your active defensive capacity to solve, right? State 3, by definition, because of this point of overwhelm, state 3, your solution failed, right? But so it's awful here, it's hopeless, it's depressed, it's, you know, you're collapsed, but your system is still looking for a way out. And so that's why people start considering suicidality here, we find. Right? And of course you have to be careful around it and, you know, handle it well. But I'm telling you that as state 3 clears, so does hopelessness, so does suicidality. Things that people think are so fundamental to their experience of being who they are can actually shift when the nervous system state shifts, right? If somebody's lived in state 3 their whole life, their identity is going to be wrapped up in state 3. The one last thing here is state 3 alternates or occurs simultaneously with state 1 and 2 symptoms. So what we're saying is all the anxiety, fear, and sympathetic activation that happens here doesn't go away, right? Yeah, it's dual activated, it's bimodal, right? And so you're feeling the collapse and you're feeling the activation. You're feeling the hypoarousal, you're feeling the hyperarousal. Anxiety and collapse, yeah. And of course, when I say that, your minds may drift towards the bipolar diagnosis, right? Yeah. Anytime any clinician, most medical people, when they hear any kind of cycling of hyper and hypoarousal, the bipolar diagnosis comes out of the closet. And my sense of that is that there absolutely is something called bipolar disorder, right? Especially bipolar 1. You'll notice that mania is nowhere to be found on this map, right? Mania is not what happens here. You don't go into any of these states and think that you're going to be king of the world, right? That kind of thing. But things that are like, like bipolar 2, I think it's a creeping diagnosis. And in the DSM-4, they used to have something called pediatric bipolar, right? So kids with bipolar disorder. And in DSM-5, they removed it because too many psychiatrists were medicating kids for bipolar. And what an intense disorder label to be given as a kid, right? And so my question was, well, wait, was it a thing in the first place, or is it not a thing? And if it's not a thing, why was it listed as a thing? And how many other things are like that, Like, I mean, they took it away because too many doctors were prescribing for it, right? They call it temper dysregulation disorder now, right? So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is when we're looking at, when you have people who have bipolar 2 and have a history of trauma, I become a little suspicious, all right? And what I would say to that person is, look, we don't know what's coming from where. There's no blood test that you can take for bipolar disorder, right? And so you may have this and your symptoms may be coming from bipolar disorder, or your symptoms may be coming from this bimodal element of trauma. Right. Like that. The image that I like to use for this is like, imagine all the upset and anxiety here, and you're just taking a big wool blanket and muffling states 1 and 2, and you're feeling kind of collapsed, right? So you can still kind of feel the anxiety, but it's not nearly as active as it was if you're over here. Okay, so let me read this to you. This is again from Bessel van der Kolk from his paper, which I highly recommend you read. It's The Body Keeps the Score, but that was the name of his book, but it's based on a research paper he did in 1994. Right. So I'm going to read both of these to you because I think they're both kind of intriguing. Stress-induced analgesia has been described in experimental animals after a variety of inescapable stressors, right? So right then, let's stop right then. What does inescapable mean, right? In terms of our map, it means that they're not here. It means that they're not here or here, right? These were all escapable stressors. Inescapable means like the animal does everything it can and it's overwhelmed. So by definition, he's talking about things on the parasympathetic side. Okay, so after a variety of inescapable stressors such as electric shock, fighting, starvation, and cold water swim, in severely stressed animals, opiate withdrawal symptoms can be produced either by termination of the stress or by naloxone injections. Right, so this is extraordinary. So what he's basically saying is that you can give this inescapable stress to animals by all these different routes, and then all of a sudden, if you terminate that threat, like if you terminate that stressor, then you see this poor animal's body go into withdrawal symptoms from its own opioid production. And this is a little bit further down. 2 decades after the original trauma, opioid-mediated analgesia, which of course means numbing, developed in subjects with PTSD in response to a stimulus resembling the traumatic stressor, which we correlated with the secretion of endogenous opioids equivalent to 8 milligrams of morphine, right? So basically what he's saying here, again, this was written in 1994, they brought in Vietnam War vets 20 years later, right? And they gave them some echo of the war, a sight, a sound, a smell, and these vets just flat out dissociated, right? And to match their level of dissociation, they had to, it took 8 milligrams of morphine. So basically, you know, they use 2 to 4 milligrams of morphine in hospital settings for severe breakthrough pain. Right.
So there are some useful takeaways from van der Kolk's research on our response to inescapable shock or inescapable threat. The first is that dissociation is a very real, very involuntary biochemical shift that takes place in the brain. So basically, the pharmacy that we are all walking around with in our heads is generating and releasing these opioid-based numbing chemicals to help us deal with the traumatic events that have taken place in our lives. Even if these events have taken place decades earlier, we're still getting this large, 8 milligram release of opioids. And to a large extent, this response does not seem to degrade with time. The next point is that imagine the client that you're working with in therapy having taken an opioid and sitting down and you're trying to do therapy with that person, right? So basically, the second point is that it's somewhat useless to try and conduct talk therapy, especially while a client is numbing out like this, while they're in one of these dissociative nervous system states. And this is because they simply don't have access to much beyond their cognitive capacity, right? They don't have a lot of access to their emotions or their body or anything else that's going on. And the final point, I think, is a very interesting one specifically for psychedelic therapy, right? So imagine what will happen when you have a psychedelic response that goes head-to-head against a opioid numbing response, right? So somebody who's interested in working with psychedelics will be taking something to help them deal with the trauma in their lives, while at the same time their brain is getting ready to have this large opioid dump into their system. And it's been doing this for their whole life, and it's not going to stop today, right? So basically what we see is that the psychedelic response is overpowered by the opioid. What this looks like in practice is sobriety, right? So we see this with psilocybin. We see this with MDMA, that somebody could be at the height of a psychedelic therapy experience and experience nothing but pure sobriety. They just seem like they could take off their eye shades and go about their day. They think they got a placebo dose or that the medicine's not working, when in fact it's just being crushed by the opioid numbing response, which is much more powerful.
Yeah, so here's a really interesting, I was on a podcast at the Journal of Psychedelic Psychiatry, and the person who runs that is a psychiatrist. And so we were talking about this, and after I mentioned it, he said, that's super interesting, because what he sees is veterans whose opioid system seems to have burned out, meaning that they've been doing this for so long that their system cannot keep up with the opioid production that they need. And so then they have to add in, those are the people that go looking for opioids, right? So he's just saying these systems just burn out, and therefore we have to, they supplement, basically. So we haven't touched on this yet, but we're gonna be talking a lot more about solutions and relational solutions, correctives, right? But really, the difference between state 3, which we've covered, moderate trauma, and state 4 is the presence or absence of solution, right? That's the whole ballgame in terms of this nervous system map, and I'll explain in a bit. So state 3 is defined as a conceivable, attainable, possible solution that wasn't actually achieved, right? So in other words, the human example of this is, imagine a child that's being abused at home, neglected, but this child has grandma's house, right? So on the weekends, she goes to grandma's house. And grandma's house is a safe place, it's a warm place. So in the psyche of this child, in the consciousness of this child, there's a way out. But in reality, she wasn't able to get to grandma's house enough to avoid the trauma, right? So that creates state 3, right? So it's a state of ooh, there's a way out, but I couldn't get to it in time. If I could have dialed 911 in time, if I could have hit the brakes in time, so there's all these traumas that we have that were incredibly overwhelming, that there were solutions to, but we couldn't enact them, right? So just imagine, I don't know if you've seen any these suspense thriller movies that they get under your skin because they put people in this state 3 fundamentally, right? Where somebody has to be quiet underneath a bed or something like that, and they're incredibly, there's all this stuff going on, and there's a solution, but they can't get to it, right? And so again, how I imagine state 3 is that coiled spring. it's wanting to go, it's wanting to launch into something, but the solution just never showed up.
So before moving on to state 4, I thought we'd give you an example of what states 1, 2, and 3 look like in real life. The example that we're using here is from the animal world, but remember, this is the mammalian nervous system that we're talking about, so all the responses that you see here absolutely apply to us as well.
Generally, a female with cubs must hunt 4 to 5 times more than another. Between shrubs where the fire flamed crimson, the cheetah slinks by, stalking a more substantial prey. A group of impalas have found refuge in the shrubs, whose flamboyant colors merge with their tawny coat. Duma advances, trying to pick out her victim.
Okay, so right here we see the cheetah's nervous system is at state 1, right? So there's some mild level of activation. She's stalking her prey. There's contraction, there's focus, everything that she needs to sort of position herself for an attack.
At last, she dashes forward.
Okay, and what we're seeing here is that the cheetah's nervous system has moved to state 2, right? So if you remember, state 2 is defined as maximum activation, maximum performance. It's the maximum sympathetic arousal, right? And we would assume at this point that the gazelle's nervous system has also moved to state 2 to escape the cheetah. And finally, remember that this is a semi-stable nervous system state, meaning it cannot hold the marble. So the chase is going to be over in 30 seconds, whether the cheetah gets the gazelle or not. But you know, you can't sprint for longer than 30 seconds. That kind of thing.
This time, Duma has killed a good-sized female impala. Unfortunately, in the savannah, one's own gratification often stimulates another's envy. Duma's catch, which has been observed from start to finish, has not left Mama Kingua, the spotted hyena, indifferent. She knows that Duma is completely extenuated by her final sprint. And yet, things may not finish as we thought they would.
Okay, so we've got a twist in the plot here. So as the camera moves back over to the hyena and the gazelle, I want you to keep your eyes on the gazelle and her legs in particular. Just notice how rigid they are, how stiff they are. It's almost like, you know, this animal is just preparing for death, even as it's being sort of, moved around, bitten into by the hyena.
For sometimes the weak are capable of cunning dissimulation.
And she's off. Okay, guys, so that is a perfect textbook example of what state 3 is all about. So if you remember, state 3 is defined by a possible solution that failed, right? So it means that things are bad, but it's not the end. It's not over. If there's a lucky break or something like that, which we just saw, then the nervous system will push that marble back up to the fight or flight response area. So basically what that means in this case is that the gazelle was overwhelmed, couldn't run away from the cheetah, but a new solution, a new escape route showed up in the form of this hyena, which in the tussle between and the distraction that got created between the hyena and the cheetah, the gazelle's nervous system said, okay, there's a possible escape here, let's go for it. So it basically, again, pushes that marble up into state 2, and that gazelle is out of there.
Now, state 4 is when there's no grandma's house at all, right? Solution was or is inconceivable, non-existent. Rescue is completely out of one's ability, inescapable shock, right? So how I would define this as state 0, no threat. State 1, stressor but escapable stressor. State 2, much more significant stressor and threat, but also still escapable. State 3, overwhelming level of threat, but possible way out. State 4, such an overwhelming level of threat, we just went blank. Here are the symptoms of state 4, right? So it's a much more significant opioid dump, right? Blank affect, numbness, feeling disconnected. Notice that all of these are different words for gone, for blankness. Spaciness, again, more vision changes here. Feelings of unreality, like, so people will sit there and process in this state and they'll feel like they're made of plastic. They're like, oh, my legs or my arms feel like they're made of metal, or they're floaty, or they're gone. Or they'll say, like, my head feels like a balloon and it's only tied to my body by a string, right? This is the most dissociated state we get to in terms of a nervous system response. DID is further than this, but that DID is not simply a nervous system response. There's other things going on. Out-of-body experiences. So this is where people will describe an event from a third-person perspective. They'll say, "Oh, and I'm out on the street and I'm watching the cars come together," or I'm watching myself sitting on the couch while this is happening." Things like that. Again, floaty. And here's the tricky part with this: respite. Right? It feels like a break. It feels good in a way. Right? I mean, it doesn't feel like anything, but not feeling anything is a huge improvement from what this did feel like. So if you think about everything, all the levels of threat and upset and pain and suffering that have had to go on in a person's system before they get to state 4, right? Numbing out is a huge solution for that. It's an answer to the chaos and the suffering of this world, right? So when people live in state 4, it takes, especially if they had an entire childhood in state 4, first of all, they're not going to know that they live in state 4, right? They're not going to have any contrast to any other states here because they're just going to know a kind of numbed out existence, right? But it takes a lot to give them a sense that the world is different. The world is safe enough now, right? We need some really significant prediction errors for them to say to their system, you can come out of the hole in the ground and come back into the world, right? Because remember, so everything that's happening at state 3, it's collapse, it's hopeless, it's awful, it's depressed, but you're still in the realm of feeling, right? That's important. You're still feeling here. You're feeling everywhere on this map except for here. I will guarantee you everybody in this room has some state 4, sure, right? So I want you to become familiar with what it looks like for you, right? It looks like different things for different people. For some people, it feels like you ask them, okay, so first of all, if somebody's in state 4 and you ask them how you feel, they'll say, I feel fine, right? Because they're not feeling anything, right? And of course, if you ask somebody at state 0 how you feel, they'll say, I feel fine, right? But again, so the behavioral aspects, the outward appearance of somebody at state 0 and state 4 is identical. The internal experience is absolutely different, right? So state 0, you're associated, you can respond to the world, you can have relationship from state 0, you can feel things in state 0, right? You have an interior in state 0. In state 4, none of those things. You don't have an interior. You can't feel things. So if you ask the person in state 4 how you feel and they say, I feel fine, then obviously you have to probe more, right? Like, tell me what fine feels like. Give me the details of fine. Because if somebody is in state 0, they can give you the details of fine, right? Neutrality has a feeling to it, right? It's like, oh yeah, I can feel my belly. I can feel my chest. My throat feels open. Like I can feel my breathing. I can feel myself resting in this chair, right? State 4, they can't give you any of that information, right? So yeah, learning to track it, and I will also say, if you're doing talk therapy and your client is in state 4, you have no way of knowing your client is in state 4 because the cognitive capacity becomes actually less encumbered in state 4 than any place else on the map, except for state 0. You can create state 4 by a bad car accident, or you could have state 4 by growing up in a genocidal war where all your family died, right? Both of those will create state 4, right? Obviously, the second one, the genocidal war, will create a much deeper version of state 4.
It's like a cold, slow motion wave. And it goes all the way down into my digestive system, freezing everything. And slow motion wave, now it's going to the right. Like a cold, icy wave. Deep ocean.
Freezing things.
Yeah. And it's just flowing over to the right now, freezing everything in its path.
Does that mean it freezes emotions as well, or just body?
Everything. I feel like Spock.
Okay.
I feel cold.
Okay.
Literally cold.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like a fist.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Watch the fist. Let it do its thing. Let it do its thing.
My heart's beating really fast.
Yeah, there it is. There it is. Stay with it. Stay with it. Scary? Yeah, yeah. Stay right there. If you need my hand, I'm right here. If you need contact, I'm right here. But stay with it.
It's like it's fury that's protecting me. It's just, I'm so mad.
Yeah. Let it do it all by itself. Let it do it all by itself.
It's like the fear is underneath the fury. It's really cold.
Yes. Let it all surprise you. Yeah, confusing, fury, and fear all at the same time.
Coming back to life. It's unclenching around my eyes and my chest and my hands. My diaphragm. My heartbeat. Oh, yeah, God. Oh, God. Yeah, this is that expanding out of having been encased feeling. Like I'm able to fully expand. I'm not contained.
This is what I call a solution-based understanding of trauma, meaning that the resources, the solutions that somebody has at the time of the event dictates where they land on this map. And also a person's solutions dictate how well they move on this map. The state 3s and state 4s that we have inside of us, the vast majority of them are from childhood. Right? Because that's when our solutions were our parents. And if you had parents that weren't great parents, if they had their limitations, let's say, that's when people end up in 3s and 4s, right? Because as adults, we have financial capacity. We can pick up the phone. We can get in our cars and leave, right? Things like that, a bad situation. Children can't do that, right? So again, I'll say that again. The vast majority of things that create dissociation in our system happen in childhood, right? So the research refers to this as battlesomeness, right? Basically, an organism's capacity to deal with a threat is its battlesomeness. The more capacity it has, the more it'll end up on this side of the map. The less that it has, the more that it ends up on that side of the map, right? For shorthand, we just refer to these sympathetic symptoms as hot symptoms, and these as cold, right? So states 1 and 2 are, relatively speaking, a piece of cake, right? So if somebody comes into my office and they have just anxiety symptoms, even panic symptoms, they're not dissociating, hallelujah, lucky you, right? And because again, no dissociation happened. They didn't fragment here, right? And so the prognosis is quite good with that. Everything that the person is working with is visible to their consciousness, right? Their stress, anxiety, fear, panic, these are all things that we can track inside of ourselves. These are things that our consciousness can see and engage with. State 3 and 4, you have no idea what's going on.
And they don't either.
Yeah, that's what, right? They don't know what's going on. So state 3 and 4 are marked by things that should be there but are not there, right? So you should have a body, but you don't. You should have emotions, but you're flat, right? You should have responses here. Like most people in this situation would have responses. When the fact that people don't means something. It's not random, right? So I'm going to say something a little controversial here, so I'm acknowledging that. But I will say that the majority of psychotherapy is designed to work with 1s and 2s, and we're pretty good with 1s and 2s. Even something like EMDR, right? So the protocol for EMDR, this is not me talking, this is the protocol talking, saying that, you know, you can work with their client, and if your client starts to dissociate, you have to back out and resource them, right? So what does that mean? It means that probably the most well-known trauma modality out there doesn't work with 3s and 4s because your client should be dissociating to work with 3s and 4s. It means that EMDR is designed to work with 1s and 2s. And that's not a slight against EMDR. It's saying like, great, like we want, and anything helps, right? And if we can clear these 1s and 2s, you're really helping people. I'm not saying EMDR wouldn't work with 3s and 4s. I'm just saying it wasn't designed for that. I don't think it's been tested for that, right? So exposure therapy works great with 1s and 2s, right? I think the true art and the true difficulty of working with in mental health and with psychedelic therapy is happening down here, right? The 3s and 4s. What's missing? And I think this is the true gift of working with psychedelics because they give us so much access to this, right? Again, this is all the world of the non-declarative, right? That all of a sudden becomes visible when you enter primary consciousness. So there's a huge opportunity for us here, right? Let me give you another sort of visual here to kind of demonstrate, I think, what's happening, right? So I want you to picture at state 0 that you have a nice image of your client, and it's like a puzzle piece images, right? But it's all well put together, so it's a coherent image of your client, and it's just resting on the table. In state 1, that puzzle becomes pressurized a bit, but it's still a coherent picture of your client, right? State 2, there's a whole lot more pressure on that puzzle, but it's still holding together as a coherent image of your client. State 3, the pressure is so increased that the puzzle has broken into pieces and is scattered about the room, right? And in state 4, yet even more pressure, and the pieces are far flung. Right? And so what we're doing with this work with selective inhibition is we're taking a magnet, we're putting it down into the center of this room and using your client's consciousness, and we're holding it there until they start to reassociate to all of their dissociation, to everything that's happening down here, to not having a head, to not having arms, to not having a body, to not having emotions. Right? Just notice that, and we're going to stay with that. As opposed to trying to shift to things that are happening, we're staying with what's not happening. Right?
Are we the magnet?
We are the magnet, yeah. We, your client's consciousness, yeah. So we're holding that. So as the magnet is there, the pieces are coming together slowly, slowly, slowly until they're close enough together that pop, you move from state 4 to state 3, right? And then you keep, so basically your client is reforming, right? And then as they're moving from state 3 to 2, then you get a more coherent image of, right? So the puzzle's coming back together. Yeah?
Yeah, great.
Yeah?
The way you do that, Saj, you
Yeah.
said is just to have them stay with it, even if it's just fragmented pieces.
Yeah.
Stay with each one of them.
Absolutely. It will be fragmented. Their consciousness will be fragmented here. And essentially what we're doing here is we are pressurizing the system into a healing response.
Okay, everyone. This is a topic that I could talk a lot more about, and there's a lot more details to go into, which we do in our trainings. But for now, let me give you a number of key summary takeaways from this biological, body-based understanding of trauma. Okay, so the first key point here is that the body, the nervous system, creates many mental health symptoms as an appropriate response to life events, right? So if you have had highly stressful or overwhelming events in your life, and you have these symptoms as a result of it, that's not you being broken. That's not a misfiring or bad wiring. It's an appropriate response to those events. I would say that the vast majority of symptoms that cause people to enter into psychotherapy are due to, again, stress and overwhelming things that have happened to them in their life, particularly in their childhood. Okay? So that's the first key point. You're not broken. Your system makes sense. The second key point here is that our biology creates these symptoms. Our biology knows how to come back from them, right? So this is a homeostatic self-correction mechanism that is built into our biology, right? So, for example, if you overheat, your body will sweat to cool you down. If you eat something that's too sugary, your body will release insulin to rebalance your blood chemistry, right? So just like that, if you have experienced stress and trauma in your life, your body knows exactly how to bring you back down to a state of neutral, state 0. Right, so again, this is something that's been in evolution for millions and millions of years. It's absurd to think that something that is so common in our existence as animals, threat, which is so common for us in a state of nature especially, that our biology would not have a way to homeostatically bring us back to balance from that, okay? And then the final point of this is that ultimately, we do not have to reinvent the wheel, right? So most of what we're creating in modern Western psychology are coping mechanisms and better workarounds, and they're all based in a fundamental distrust of our biology, a fundamental distrust of our roots and what we're capable of. So this is me saying that we do not have to reinvent the wheel when nature has done it so well the first time around, right? We're not going to come close to doing it as well. Okay, and then the final takeaway point here is that the body, our biology, is a preferential pathway for the psychedelic process to take through our system, right? So what I mean by that is when, in our experience, in our clinical experience, if we introduce this autonomic nervous system pathway to clients, and it doesn't even have to be that much. Maybe they'll do 3 to 5 of these autonomic waves without medicine on board. And then if they do take a psychedelic, it will absolutely take that same nervous system pathway. And it does this because it's such a robust pathway. It's so much more robust at processing anxiety, panic, dissociation, depression, PTSD symptoms than our cognitive capacity. I think it's so much more useful for us to feel our way through symptoms than it is to try and think our way through symptoms. To try and gain more insight and more understanding fundamentally does not shift reactivity. The body, the nervous system is what generates reactivity. The body and the nervous system can shift it back to calm and neutral states. Okay, so thank you very much for your time, your engagement. If you need support with this, or if you have more questions, or if you're interested in training with us, take a look at the PSI website, which is psychedelicsomatic.org. Take care and be well.